All right, guys. So, as usual, we have some absolutely horrifying updates coming out of Israel. So, if you guys remember, we have been keeping tabs on what I think is fair to call a torture facility inside of Israel in the Negev desert. It's called Sti Timan. Now, for months, we have been getting reports of some of the most gruesome forms of torture that you could possibly imagine, including sexual abuse, that has been happening at this facility. And then just last week, we covered the story where, because Israel has been facing such immense international pressure with the ICC arrest warrants that are potentially coming for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, as well as the International Court of Justice genocide case that Israel is currently facing, they basically were saying, okay, we are going to try to at least give the perception that we are capable of handling this internally. And we don't have to have these international organizations breathing down our necks. And so what they did is they were attempting to bring in some of these IDF soldiers that were credibly accused of torture. They were going to bring them in for questioning. And as the Israeli military police was going to apprehend some of these IDF soldiers, there were full-blown riots that broke out inside of Israel. You had civilians, you had politicians, you had soldiers who all erupted into riots in order to defend the ability for the IDF to torture and to sexually abuse Palestinian detainees. And now we get this update because we have video confirmation of this event taking place. So let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this video. It's obviously going to be obscured here. I have the volume lowered because it's in Hebrew, but what you see here is you see a bunch of Palestinians that are detained lying face down on the ground. They're all in white suits, it looks like, for the most part. We've covered the 42 different kinds of torture that Euromed Human Rights Monitor has reported coming out of detention camps like this. And then here you see a Palestinian man. You see a dog right here, it looks like, with an IDF soldier. You see this Palestinian man who is being brought over into the corner. And then what you're going to see is IDF soldiers who clearly know that they are being filmed, right, that there are security cameras. They set up a wall here. They set up a wall of shields so that people can't see what they're doing. And this is when they were engaging in the sexual abuse of this Palestinian detainee. So, just to make things clear for everybody here, we have a confirmed 100% torture facility where Palestinians are being abducted from Gaza by the IDF, are taken to this camp. In some cases, the restraints that Palestinians have been subjected to has required amputations. In other circumstances, again, we have had multiple reports of sexual abuse, including electric rods being shoved up people's anuses, right? I know that this is graphic, but this is what's happening. Again, we have countless different forms of torture that are happening at this facility. And this is the government, this is the military that we are sending tens of billions of dollars to engage in so-called self-defense. Self-defense. Does this look like self-defense to you guys? This was apparently the argument that was being used by the law firm or the lawyer that was defending some of these IDF soldiers when they were about to be brought in for questioning. They actually tried to claim self-defense. Self-defense for raping a Palestinian detainee. Self-defense should give you a little bit of an insight in terms of what the government, the military of Israel, means when they say self-defense, as they have been over the last 9-10 months of this genocide. So we have the video there. We also have this clip, which is from the Israeli media, Channel 12, which is one of the main Israeli national news outlets, essentially. And here we have them defending this torture, defending this sexual abuse. Let's go ahead and watch this. I'll sort of try to commentate my way through as we go through it because it's obviously in Hebrew, but he says, I told my friends that I don't give a rat's ass about what they do to a guy like that. What? Is that what you really think? Unequivocally, yes. He says, I'll explain soldiers who are suspected in the criminal offense of rape of a cuffed prisoner. This doesn't interest you. Does the morality of our soldiers interest you? No. He says, again, I don't give a rat's ass what they did to that Hamas man. I always remember, first of all, the only thing is that there is a problem with not regulated policy of the state to abuse detainees. Do you guys understand what he's saying here? He's saying his main issue with this kind of a clip is that this is not standard operating procedure for the IDF, which first off, I would take, issue with the idea that this isn't, the standard operating procedure for what they do with people who have been abducted from Gaza. This is what they have been doing. This is not the only instance of torture or sexual abuse that we have seen reported, but this is the kind of shit that they are defending in Israeli media. Now, let's just think about this, guys. Like, I want you guys to think about the height of the Iraq war in this country. Now, granted, I was young when a lot of this was actually happening, so I'm not fully aware of what the media landscape was here in the United States. But from what I understand, it was egregious, it was horrible, it was bloodthirsty. But I don't recall people looking at something like Abu Ghraib, for example, and just like full-blown defending it in public on national TV. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe you guys can show me some of those clips. But these are people on national TV in Israel that are openly defending the ability for their soldiers to rape detainees. This is not normal. This is not a normal country, okay? This is not a country that should be considered one of our closest allies, let alone this bullshit narrative that they are the only democracy in the Middle East and they are defenders of freedom and democracy and human rights. All of that is obvious bullshit. The idea that we should be looking at a country where in their mainstream media outlets they are openly defending rape as a form of torture. This is the country we should be sending tens of billions of dollars to. This is the country we should be diplomatically defending on the international stage. This shit is not normal, guys. This should never be normalized. This is fucking insanity. That's what this is. Now, we also have this here as pointed out by Asal Rod. She says Amnesty International reported torture of Palestinian detainees all the way back in November, right? UN report in March described widespread abuse, including sexual assault. CNN reported the same thing back in May. And then Bet Salem calls it hell. It's been a full day since the video of Israeli soldiers raping a detainee was leaked, confirming the abuse we know has been happening for months, and there is barely a whisper of it in the Western media. And she's 100% correct. Like, you'll get every once in a while, an article like this from CNN that you see down here. But for the most part, let's just do a comparison, right? How much reporting has there been from the Western mainstream media on these allegations, most of which have been completely debunked at this point, of sexual assault on October 7th, right? Now, that's not me saying that there weren't war crimes committed on October 7th. Of course there were. But there's been this narrative that has been repeatedly, regurgitated by mainstream media, by our politicians, that there was widespread, coordinated, pre-planned sexual abuse on October 7th. This is something that has been backed by essentially no evidence whatsoever, right? But this was yet covered month after month after month as a justification, right? An explanation for what Israel is doing inside of Gaza. Well, sure, Israel may have gone a little bit overboard with their bombing campaign inside of Gaza, bombing mosques and churches and schools and hospitals and UN shelters and refugee camps, but they're not Hamas, because Hamas is so savage, they are so barbaric, that they would engage in a sexual assault campaign, a systematic sexual abuse of Israelis on October 7th. That was the narrative from our media, from our politicians. And again, most of that was completely debunked. It was not backed by verifiable evidence in any way, shape, or form. And yet you look at a literal video of a Palestinian detainee being sexually assaulted by the IDF. Where is the US media on this? Because this is not the only example we have. Again, this has been systematic. And it's not just sexual abuse. It's a whole bunch of other dozens of different kinds of abuse that I've covered on this channel before. This is a systematic issue with the IDF, right? With the Israeli government, with Israeli society. That this would even be a conversation on mainstream media in Israeli society is fucking crazy. That's fucking crazy. But this is the government that we are supposedly propping up as the defender of democracy and human rights and freedom and all of that. There's a little, but a little peep from the US media on this kind of shit. You can't prop up Hamas as the greatest evil in the world because they supposedly committed some forms of sexual assault on October 7th and then turn around and turn a blind eye to what the IDF, our ally, that we are sending billions of dollars to, is doing systematically to Palestinians. Again, many of whom are just civilians. They're not even militants that have been fighting against the IDF. They're just civilians, and they have been subjected to these forms of torture. Yet there is silence from the U.S. media. Now, we also had our boy, friend of the show, Ryan Grimm, who pressed the State Department ghoul, Matthew Miller, on this reality. So let's go ahead and listen to what he had to say here.
And finally, on this rape and torture center that seems to be pretty clear, all sides seem to agree that horrible things are taking place here. How is it still open? Does the U.S. believe that it needs to be closed at this point and just...
So we believe that all of the allegations need to be fully investigated, and anyone responsible needs to be held accountable. I think that's the appropriate first step before moving to anything else. We'll go one more in the back, and then we'll wrap for today.
Okay, so shouldn't be surprising to anybody, at least who subscribes to my channel, who has seen probably 100 clips of guys like Matthew Miller at this point, but his excuse is that, well, we need to see an investigation. An investigation. Guys, I just showed you video evidence of this kind of torture taking place. We have countless reports from human rights organizations, from Gazans who have been released back to Gaza and have reported on this kind of torture. We have reports from, anonymous IDF soldiers themselves who have been at this facility. The idea that there is an investigation needed in order to comment on this is in and of itself ridiculous. It's additionally ridiculous when you think about if this was any other country that we were talking about. Imagine, for example, if this was Russia. Imagine if the Russian military had set up some sort of a torture camp inside of Moscow, for example. And at this torture camp, we had verifiable testimony, video evidence that they were abducting Ukrainian civilians and subjecting them to 42 different kinds of torture, including straight up, sexual abuse and rape. Do you think that somebody like Matthew Miller would turn around and respond to that situation by saying, well, we need an investigation by Vladimir Putin. We need an investigation from the Russian Federation before we comment on this? Of course not. Of course he would never say that in a million years. The other, deeply ironic point about this situation is that him making this kind of a statement, we need to have some investigations. Motherfucker, what just happened last week? The Israeli government tried to bring some of these rapist IDF soldiers in for questioning, and what happened? You had mass riots that broke out. People were breaking in to the Stieteman facility. They were rioting on behalf of these soldiers, who, by the way, were not even being charged with anything. They weren't even being, thrown into jail. They were being brought in for questioning. And you had mass riots that broke out on their behalf, to the point where most, if not all of these soldiers that were accused of this heinous crime have since been released. They've been released. An investigation? What the fuck are you talking about, an investigation? As if the IDF is credible? They're credible to investigate themselves in this situation. Absolute insanity and obvious dishonesty. These are the same guys. Guys like Matthew Miller. Right? There was a recent hypocrisy burn that Ryan was able to get in there in one of these recent questionings that he had. We was talking about the difference between Venezuela versus Pakistan, where in Pakistan, in their recent elections that took place, some of the most obvious fraud that you could possibly imagine. They were changing results overnight. They had a media blackout. They were, intentionally going after and targeting and punishing opponents in the Imran Khan faction of their political sphere. And yet the U.S. had barely anything to say about any of that, right? But then when it came to the Venezuelan election, suddenly it's like, okay, we recognize the opposition as the legitimate winners of this election. And the question was basically how do you have any credibility when it's U.S. allies who are willing to be subservient to the U.S. government? You guys overlook all of these anti-democratic measures, these measures that go completely contradictory to international human rights standards. When it's an ally of the United States, we will overlook everything for them. We will completely disregard international law. We will disregard U.S. law. We will do everything under the sun in order to protect our precious allies, especially when it comes to Israel. Israel is above everybody else when it comes to that kind of thing. But then when it's a U.S. adversary, when it's somebody that will not allow the United States government, United States corporations to exploit their resources, their labor, etc., then suddenly it's a completely different calculation, and we will use every tool at our disposal. We will weaponize international law. We will use our sanctions regime around the world. We will use our military, our intelligence apparatus in order to crush you into oblivion. It is brazen hypocrisy that is on full display with a guy like Matthew Miller. And especially when it comes to something like this. We need an investigation. We need an investigation by Israel into their own soldiers for rampant, systematic torture and sexual abuse. Do you think that's going to be a credible investigation that they engage in? Of course not. And that's not what he's looking for here. He's looking for deflections. He's looking for ways to not have to answer this question. This is what we've seen over and over and over again, month after month after month. But we're waiting for more information. Essentially, we're waiting for talking points from the Israeli government. When they say what we need to say, then we will turn around and say it. That's what guys like Matthew Miller represent. So there you go. I'm going to have another update here for you guys later in the day on Kamala Harris and how she responded at a recent rally where she was confronted by Palestinian protesters. Maybe gives us a little bit of an insight in terms of where she's going to stand on that, as well as Cori Bush being taken out of the squad, being taken out of Congress by AIPAC, obviously a pro-Israel lobbying organization here in the United States. So we got a lot more to cover in the next couple of days. And yeah, continue to subscribe, like, comment, all of that good stuff. And I'll see you guys soon.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying